What are you supposed to hit? That's on the. We will call back the city council meeting. Thank you for that brief moment. Why our systems have to get reset. We should work on the Jeopardy theme to play during that time. Okay, we are still on the appealant list. I apologize. I've been writing down names if I haven't crossed them off. Is there anybody else on the appealant list that would like to come forward?
Eileen Springer, 6817 Nickel Road. And I really do agree with what everybody's been saying here, and I appreciate them come up and talk. And I also agree that it was just like we weren't even here less for that meeting. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ellie. Anybody else?
Dusty Oliver, 6798 Nickel Road. I live in the property right adjacent to Rachel. And just, I guess my concern was originally when I was unable to make the original planning meeting, I was out of town for some work stuff, and I read through our wooded residential neighborhood code, and I saw several things in there that were going to need to be addressed, so I wasn't so concerned about being at that meeting. So I was really surprised when talking to my fellow neighbors that it had gone through, and I was really concerned about just the type of business that was going to be directly in my backyard and as well as our neighborhood. So I second everything that's been said here today, and absolutely support Jake and Rachel in their current activities, and absolutely support the congeniality of everybody that's been here today. So but I think everybody's concern that spoke before me are, it really is to the point in my mind, and probably as well as the code, in the fact that it's really more a business than a house with a family. And really that's what the code is meant to protect, and that's what I really relied on the city to protect and enforce that code. And when it didn't, I really felt let down by that, and not represented well as just a resident of the city. So that's just what I wanted to say, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Next. Again, I'm going to call for one more time. Anybody on the list, and maybe everybody's come forward, on the appealant side. Keeping with the appealing to it, if your name is not on the list, I would entertain you coming up for appealing this if your name is not on the list. Does anybody wish to come forward to the podium on that? Again, this is not a public hearing, so there will be no other time to speak with the appellant. Okay. At this point, we will turn it over for hearing the testimony rebuttal from the applicant. You have the floor.
Okay, if I come up.
You both may come up. Yes, I will allow that.
Just want to make sure. Same person.
All right, Rachel Hodge, 6716 Nickel Road.
Jacob Longley, 6716 Nickel Road.
Mayor and council members, Jake and I are the owners of Ashdown Forest School, a nature-based preschool program located at our home, licensed through Crow Wing County and the Department of Human Services. We've had consistent growth since opening in 2019, and we have an ever-growing wait list. To accommodate this growth, we built a 27-foot yurt in the woods behind our home in 2021 to be used as a licensed shelter, which has been inspected and approved by the city of Breezy Point. A portion of our home also remains licensed as an emergency relocation area. In January of this year, BLADEC, the Braden Lakes Area Economic Development Corporation, partnered with Crow Wing County to provide over $500,000 in grant funding to solve the child care shortage in our area. Our school has been selected as a $100,000 recipient of this funding. The purpose of our application is to request a home occupation interim use permit that will allow a school expansion at our current site. This would include creating 10 additional child care openings each day, building a second yurt of the same size and color scheme, and hiring 3 additional staff members. Ashdown Forest School has been granted this permit approval. We have complied with all legal and procedural requirements. We've attended a personal meeting with the city planner, submitted appropriate applications, supporting documents and fees, attended and presented at 2 consecutive Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, answered all questions asked by the Planning and Zoning Commission, We listened to public input, addressed all concerns with a flexible mindset, and agreed to comply with the proposed conditions of approval. These are all included in the minutes from the April 12th meeting, and the findings were as follows. The intended use of this permit meets the definition of home occupation. Home occupation is a permitted interim use in a wooded residential zone. The use, with conditions, conforms to the comprehensive plan. The use is compatible with the existing neighborhood. The use would not be injurious to public health, safety, welfare, decency, order, comfort, convenience, appearance, or prosperity. The use is consistent with both interim use and conditional use. Published and mailed notice was given to all residents living within 350 feet, and a public hearing was held April 12th, 2022. These findings cannot reasonably be disputed. Even still, we are here today to address each objection individually. Before we do so, we'd like to clearly point out that Jake and I personally informed all of our neighbors 1 month prior to the April 12th meeting, which is not required of us. We approached this process with optimism, but we're naive in believing that we had our neighbors' support. Objection number 1 states that the primary use of our property is to run a business, which is simply not true. The primary use of our home is to be our home. Jake and I have lived here since 2018. We're sharing our first home together. We got engaged at the lake down the road. We're getting married here in the fall, and we're planning to build a family of our own in the near future. We are planting our roots in this neighborhood. This is our community and our home. We also operate a successful childcare program on our property, and there is nothing unusual or out of the ordinary about that. To assume that we're running this program simply for business purposes is offensive, and because my character and integrity are casually being put into question, I will disclose to you that I happily took home a total of $16,000 in 2021, below poverty level. What's being disregarded in this conversation is that this is not about business, this is about children. There is a very real childcare shortage that we have been given the honor to help solve. Objection number 2 states that by having an employee, we are in violation. Again, this is completely untrue. We are allowed to hire staff. Any at-home childcare program in the state of Minnesota can hire as many staff as they would like as long as they meet licensing requirements in terms of background studies, professional development hours, etc. This is a non-issue. I brought with me all applicable state of Minnesota rules for your review if needed. Objection number 3 again states that we are in violation without adequate understanding of how licensed childcare programs operate. The objection takes issue with the number of children currently in attendance and the title of our programs. To clarify, Crow Wing County allows 14 children in attendance each day with a Class C3 license. We were granted this license due to my background and experience in early childhood education and because we operate as a partnership. I am fully aware of the state and local child care regulations, and we have never once been in violation of any licensing requirements. Our license legally allows us to enroll any children between the ages of 6 weeks and 10 years. We, however, are specialized in early childhood education. We have plans to serve children ages 2 through 7, the age in which school becomes compulsory in the state of Minnesota. In addition, we have the right to name our programs anything that we choose, and that will continue to reflect the Scandinavian teaching model that we follow. For your record, I have a copy of our child care license along with the state child-adult ratios and age distributions for various operating license classifications. Objection number 4 shares concern about the legitimacy of our yurt project. We can assure you that we have and will work hand in hand with city staff, obtaining needed certificates and permits, undergoing inspections, and following the guidelines needed for an accessory structure build. We have no desire to not be in compliance. It's also worth noting that the slope percentage of the proposed yurt location is much smaller than the already existing yurt location. This is a non-issue. We've previously addressed septic capacity guidelines, and we've agreed to annual septic inspections as recommended by the city. We brought with us a septic system certificate of installation from Crow Wing County Land Services for your review. Our septic can handle up to 300 gallons per day, and our students use a child-sized toilet which utilizes only 1.28 gallons per flush. The certificate clearly states that an increase in sewage strength, such as operating a small business, may require at most an increase in maintenance frequency, which an annual septic inspection would appropriately address. We've also stated that we're willing to build any additions necessary using our grant funding to accommodate additional use as needed. Objection number 5 shares concern of the increased traffic, which again, we've already addressed. This concern is also being greatly exaggerated. Additional traffic 30 minutes in the morning and afternoon when most adults are at work is certainly not going to pose a threat or impact the safety, order, comfort, or appearance of the neighborhood. And the numbers stated in the objection are incorrect. The objection ignores that many of our students are siblings or carpool, that one family resides in the neighborhood, and that it is common for multiple children to be absent each day. There is not one car per student. It also ignores that our drop-off and pickup times are the same as Eagleview Elementary, and that a large portion of traffic at those times is Eagleview through traffic. We all have a right to use the road. It is open to the general public, our families, and neighbors. We're aware that our neighbors care about traffic, and we do too. We have raised concerns about daytime speeds with the city in the past. We also voluntarily chose to limit our future capacity to 24 students, even though the city proposed up to 30. We remain open to conversations about the situation, including staggering drop-off and pickup times and encouraging our families to drive in from the west leg. That being said, roads are engineered to be driven on. Objection number 6 shares concerns with the vehicle capacity and flow of our driveway. It's important to note that in 2019, we had a thoughtfully designed wraparound driveway professionally installed to accommodate vehicles. There is no backing up or turning around needed as the appeal claims. As we've previously stated, we have adequate parking for all staff. I have pictures taken just this morning to support these statements. Concerns have also been shared that we are not property owners, which again is false. As mentioned in the application, I am a joint owner of the property with my parents, and in the next week, Jake and I will have sole ownership after refinancing our construction loan. I would like to add that I have recently been selected by the Minnesota Department of Human Services as one of 15 early childhood professionals in the state to work towards rewriting legislation to allow more programs just like ours to operate on residential sites. We've also become leaders in the Minnesota Forest School movement and offer professional guidance to aspiring forest school leaders from across the state, as well as teachers and administrators working towards incorporating nature-based learning into public schools. This is a movement that our city is fortunate enough to be at the forefront of, and to reject its growth would be a mistake. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. At this time, council, we can deliberate, but Mr. Chansky, do you want to, is there anything further for us to acknowledge?
Yeah, I'll just add, just to help guide your discussion this evening. As you deliberate, you can consider anything that the planning commission considered. Again, you are reviewing their review, and you can take into things that the code authorized them to look into, you may also look into. And as you deliberate, I'll just be taking notes. This evening, the goal is to make a decision as whether or not to uphold or reverse the planning commission's decision on this interim use permit. Whichever direction the council goes this evening, we're going to want to make some clear findings of fact as to why, which will then put into a resolution which will have the council adopt at your meeting on June 6th.
Okay, thank you. Does any council members have any questions of staff, applicant, or appellant at this time? Mr. Bach?
I do, Mr. Chair. I'll direct my inquiry to the planner. You've heard the charges presented by the group. You've heard the defense. I'd like your opinion, Jerry, on how that meeting was conducted. I've served on 3 planning commissions in my tenure, and I've only seen 3 that have been reversed. So I'm looking for some compelling evidence from you between the conflict of the claims and the defense. I rest my case.
Well, I think that Jerry will use the issue.
Mike.
I think the issue from the appellate standpoint is whether this is a business or a home occupation. Does this proposal meet word for word the outline of what a home occupation is? It does not meet word for word what the home occupation states in the ordinance. And specifically the employees that are called out, I think the appellate makes a point. I think the scale, initially under wooded residential, a daycare center up to 12 people is allowed without a permit. Nothing at all whatsoever. that was the reason that that avenue, or the home occupation avenue, was chosen in the conditional use in order to expand that home occupation. Again, does this meet word for word the definition of a home occupation? And is this actually a full-fledged business, or is it a business that's an incidental use to the residents? I think that's the issue before you. I don't know that got total vetting in front of the Planning Commission. I can't speak for what the Planning Commission members were thinking. They did hear testimony from the residents, and they heard testimony from interested parties and the applicant. But I think in front of you right now is the question, is this a business, or is it something that's incidental to the residents?
Your opinion.
It does not meet the definition of a home occupation, word for word.
The conditional use permit that was issued, does that make a difference?
It could.
It could.
You could modify conditions based on a conditional use. Now, is that the right?
Well, a conditional use permit is exactly what it says. It's issued with conditions.
Yes.
And you taught me well. That said, if those conditions are violated, the conditional use permit can be severed.
Upon a hearing, the conditional use
Correct.
permit can be,
I think
null and void.
I think that's crucial in the testimony here, in this particular case. At this point, I have no further questions. I want to hear from my colleagues, and I reserve the right to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Bonton. Ms. Ball?
I appreciate everyone coming and speaking. I agree with Jerry, and how the ordinance is worded in item D is problematic, I think, and would warrant a reversal of the interim use permit that was granted.
Mr. Lehigh?
I do want to just
I
add
apologize.
one additional item. I know the city is in favor of entrepreneurs and businesses, and I have children, and I understand the issue with daycares, finding a daycare, finding summer daycare. Most places are full in the summer or have waiting lists. So I definitely think there is a need for these types of businesses, and I would hope that we could direct the Planning Commission to go back, review the ordinances we have to help promote these entrepreneurs, these types of businesses within the city, and looking at what sort of modifications they could make to ordinances as appropriate.
Thank you. Mr. Lehigh?
With all that said, I'd just kind of like to add a couple more things. Back when I was first put on planning and zoning, this is years ago, basically I was taught that there's essentially three ways to violate the law. In other words, you could violate your city ordinances. Now, city ordinances are set up to be more restrictive. They cannot be less restrictive than state laws. The state laws are more liberal than what we have. Our ordinances are more restrictive. The first item that you can use to violate our ordinance is called the variance. The variance is a very powerful tool. It runs with the land and it goes forever. The next item that you can use is called a conditional use permit. That also runs with the land and it provides conditions. As long as those conditions are met, the conditional use permit is still in effect. The least powerful of those three is the interim use permit. It has all the attributes of the conditional use permit, but it has a sunset. It has a time frame. So, and in this case, the interim use permit was chosen to deviate from our existing ordinances. So by issuing the interim use permit with conditions, planning and zoning took the position that this was a reasonable use of the property. So from that standpoint, they approved it. I was, as the liaison to planning and zoning, I attended the meeting. I was not asked to speak to the topic, and I did not speak to the topic. But I think the compelling reason that it was approved was that, in their opinion, it was a reasonable use, and the conditions were reasonable, and the need for affordable childcare is paramount in our society today. So from that standpoint, I would be in favor of upholding the planning and zoning decision.
Thank you. If I may, I've heard comments about state law. Again, as Mr. Lillehei has alluded, state law, we can be more restrictive than state law. We can never be more lenient than what state law is allowed. If we are to take our ordinance as written at the time of application, it will state on 153-193, number of employees shall be limited by the interim use permit and shall be limited to family members only on the premise. That did come in consideration for home occupation. 153.003, home occupation definition, the use of commercial nature conducted by an occupant of a dwelling entirely within the dwelling or accessory structures. There's no doubt about it that there's a need for childcare. As a father of young adolescents, it's hard to find. I appreciate what this is doing. I think it's a great thing that you're doing. However, what we have to look at is what our rules and regulations are within the city. And by allowing more than family members to work in a home occupation, we need to find in the sand, when does a home occupation become a business? That, in my preference, is where we need to look at. Take daycare out of the equation, childcare out of the equation. At what point does a business capable running within a residential neighborhood? Do we allow a manufacturing plant of 4 people putting widgets and thingamabobs together in a basement? Is that what we intended with home occupation? So I really think the way that the ordinance is written today, it does not meet that. So that is where my stance is we have to look at how the ordinance is written today. Any further discussion? If not, I will entertain a motion.
I think there's a motion on the floor. Mr. Lillehei.
I didn't make a
Oh,
motion.
that is not a motion.
No.
Okay, very well.
If there is no motion, I will actually make a motion then myself. The motion is to actually repeal. Let me think about that wording. Reverse, thank you. I will use the reverse. Is reverse the planning and zoning due to the fact of how our current ordinance is written. I will follow that up with, I believe also the Planning and Zoning Commission needs to relook at all ordinances that have been addressed to make sure that we are still current. But the way that they are written today, I'm making a motion to reverse the Planning and Zoning decision.
I'll second.
I have a motion on the floor and I have a second. Is there further discussion? Mr. Bakken? I'll come back to you. What are you
Yes.
thinking?
Yes, please.
Mr. Lillihei?
No.
Ms. Ball?
It's a juxtaposition.
No, but just to emphasize too, some of the goals for the city, part of that is to go back and review ordinances to make sure that they are up to date. So
He
this
just said that.
aligns
Yeah,
with
he just
that
said
as
that.
well.
That's in the minutes. So I agree with it, totally. My concern is, and I'm not so sure which way I'm going to vote yet. I'm leaning to your, against my better will. I'm wondering how this situation, how do we fix it? I'm assuming by sending it back to the planning commission. Fix it? No?
No.
Please, I want your input, Mr. Lilla. I want your input.
If we vote to reverse it, it's reversed in our June meeting by resolution. It doesn't go back to planning and zoning for any reconsideration.
Okay, but can they amend the ordinance to better accommodate
Down the line,
their situation?
down
And
the line,
that's the only case we have in point.
down the line, planning and zoning can modify ordinances.
I would assume so.
Yes,
Well,
but that's not part of what we're discussing.
no, I understand that. How does this council send that message to P and Z?
We can have the discussion after the motion.
Right.
To
Fair, okay.
request staff to work with P and Z.
Okay, that's paramount to my vote.
Can staff correct me if I'm misspeaking on that?
Maybe I can help a little bit.
Yes.
The council can direct the P and Z to do anything that
That's right.
they so choose.
Absolutely.
The crux of the matter is, though, if there is some changes to the ordinance, the P and Z can only recommend to the council that they be changed. The council is the only one that can approve those ordinances.
I think, Jerry, thank you for that comment. We all understand that. And that's the impetus of my direction. We got to fix that. We need this type of service in the community. We need apartments. We need childcare, on and on and on. So I'm ready to vote with the caveat that that direction, we'll talk about that.
And the administrator?
Oh, sorry.
I would just like to add, if we could, just for clarity and because of how this is coming, if we can have a vote first on whether to reverse, pretty much on the current motion, which would be to reverse the planning commission, and then if you would like to send the direction to the planning commission, have that be a separate secondary.
I'll modify my motion to just state the reversal of the planning and zoning for this interim use application.
Second.
Do we still have a second? There is a motion on the floor and a second. Any further discussion? Everybody understands the motion?
Yes, sir.
All those in favor of the reversal, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
It passes 3-1 for the reversal. I will make the motion that we forward on all ordinances that have been discussed back to P and Z to review. And should those ordinances change, those we passed on to city council, those are a public hearing for ordinance changes?
Typically, there is.
There is a public hearing for ordinance changes. So I will make that motion to pass that back for staff to work with P and Z, which will most likely come up on their June meeting. Potentially July, maybe, future, in the next month or two, and bring it back to the council.
And I want to make sure the focus is on exactly that ordinance and how it can help accommodate this situation in the very near future.
Yes.
I'm going to make sure of that.
And I'll just sorry, I made the motion, let's go for a second first, then we'll have some further
Second.
discussion. Second. For further discussion too, I think the 12 versus 14 with county, the state, I think a lot of information needs to be reviewed to match that of what our local ordinance should be pertaining.
Yes, sir.
So motion on the floor, second to pass this back. Any further discussions?
No.
I would ask that we expand the suggestion to look at not just like the 3 ordinances that were presented before us, but any other tangential related ordinances that the city has
Very
that
good.
sort of are connected with promoting these types of businesses within the city.
Yes. More
yes.
succinct.
Clear on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Last item is adjourning. We are adjourned.
Get to vote